Hi, it's Kate Arndt, the Youth and Diary Historian here at the Holocaust Museum in Houston. It has been a long time since we've done one of these videos. I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of something that's been on my mind a little bit when it comes to the Holocaust initially. I want to talk a little bit about grief and grieving. Grief and grieving is really hard. So are we going to have another youth chat video? Yes. Do not worry, we'll have one next week. But today I kind of wanted to discuss a little bit about grieving. So a lot of these people that I study, half of their families were gone by the time 1945 hit. Good boy. I like to bring up a couple of people that I talk about a lot, but I always want to think of this from their perspective. So when we think about families, especially like Chava and Peter, the Genses, or in Chava's case, the Pressburgers, it's kind of difficult to express how somebody would handle it, losing their family members. Or in the case of the Wolves, where Felicitas is the only one to survive out of her two brothers, Kurt and Otto. And I kind of want to talk a little bit about that first. We'll start with these first, start with them first, because I feel like hers is a little bit more tragic. I mean, they're all tragic, but you know, hers is, the way that these women handled the deaths of their brothers or said siblings or loss of their family members were very, very, very different. So Otto and Kurt were both dead in 1945. Kurt died actually first in March of 1943, and then Otto was murdered on April 20th, 1945. Felicitas, the only girl, and the middle child, was the only one to have survived of the three of them. Her parents both survived, thank God, right? And yet she literally had to try to process not one death, but two, pretty much at the same time. Because if you know the story of how the news of the boys were relayed to said family, was they were both, their mother and their father and Felicitas were told about both boys' deaths on the same day, within an hour of each other. So Kurt was, so Otto was, they told about the news of Otto first. And then not even an hour later, they find out that Kurt had died as well. Now, I think you want to try to picture this real quick. I don't think a lot of us can picture this. That this family with three beautiful children was now down to one. Both boys are gone, the oldest and the baby. Otto's the youngest, Kurt is the oldest. Felicitas is the only girl. So I think if I get a little bit emotional about it, it's because I can understand the pain, I guess, if you will, of losing somebody so close to you. Felicitas became a woman who tried so hard not to talk about any of it. Sorry, because it was very, very painful. Painful in the sense of, how do you look at your parents? How do your parents handle it? How do you have family dinners? How do you have family holidays anymore? You know, how does losing a child, how does your mother deal with losing a child? Her mother lost two. She lost her oldest and she lost her baby. I don't know about you. I don't have children as of yet, except I have a little Fluff, but that's my baby. But I don't know about you, people who have children. But losing a child, there's no name for it. There is a name for a person who loses parents, and that's an orphan. There is no name for a person who loses a child, because that's not supposed to happen at all. And yet, thousands of families were affected by this, including the Wolves. So Felicitas literally had to shove it down. She had to work, you know, she opened up her own clothing store, and she did it on merit of her two brothers laying down their lives for her, which technically Otto really did. But you have to remember that pain and suffering, especially grieving, is so difficult for different families. And for the Wolves, they tried to make it look like that Felicitas had to do it all. So she had to take care of not only her parents, but yet she got married, and then she had two children, and she had to take care of them. So in a way, she's trying to be normal, I guess, just try to shove it down and try to act like, okay, yeah, her brothers died. It's kind of, it's so hard, I think, in a way, because there was a time that she was walking home. I believe this is early 1946, and for some reason she just starts screaming on the road. I mean, she's like on the street. I mean, she's just crying, she's screaming, and it's because I don't think she ever fully processed the loss of her brothers, Kurt and Otto. I think Otto especially, because Otto and Felicitas were in hiding together, and they spent a lot of time together, and Otto was very protective of his family. If you know the story of why, because he literally died protecting them from the Nazis. He literally said, I don't care, you can shoot me, I'm not going to tell you where my family is, period, social period. And Felicitas, I don't think she ever fully grasped how much of a gift he gave her until much, much later. And I think that's what really kind of invoked the whole, well, I'm not going to say anything, I don't want to talk about it kind of deal, because there's not really a lot of interviews with her, like at all. Like there's no video interview with her at all. There's no Shoah Foundation interview with her, like, period. I think she probably declined that invitation many times, I'm sure, if she was ever asked, or maybe she was never asked, I don't know. But she never wanted to discuss it. And I think the reason this being is Alexander Zapruder said it, who's a dear colleague of mine. She said in a way that Otto's death was very painful for her, and she loved Otto very much, and it was extremely painful because of the way that he died. Well, you have to remember that both of her parents were, you know, older side at that point, and they lost their sons. And I can't even imagine trying to eat at dinner, having your table and having two chairs not there. And I think I read somewhere once if Felicitas said, you know, sometimes I feel like Otto was going to come right through that door, but I know he's not. That's hard. And as Alexander Zapruder told me, that she really had to do a lot of convincing of Felicitas, kind of get her to just talk a little bit about what had happened to her, because, you know, the Holocaust is very traumatic. I don't think we actually realize the damage or the severity of that. People will try to be like, oh, you know, Jews are terrible, they deserve that. No, they didn't. And, you know, and people like to throw the word around. People like to throw the word genocide around. This is an actual genocide. Lives destroyed because of what they were. And as Alexander Zapruder said it, Felicitas was a very positive person, and she urged people to be the same. And she didn't like bringing up the past very much. And understandably, because how, we'll get to this, I'll get to this question in just a second, this answer in just a second. How do you explain to somebody the way that your siblings died, or the way that your parents died, or the way that your grandparents died, or any of your family members or relatives or friends or anybody who died? How do you explain that to these people? How do you explain that to the average person? Oh yeah, by the way, my brother, he died in battle, which really, Kurt was wounded, but Kurt actually took his own life because he thought like a doctor, because he is like, I'm not gonna die on enemy lines. That's just, I don't tell that to people much because trigger warning. But with Otto, he was flat out killed. I mean, how do you explain that to somebody? Felicitas, thank God, she did give us Otto's diary to the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. And she did that because she could, number one, she could no longer handle it. She told them in 1995, she says, you take it, I can't handle it anymore. The woman was 75 years old, I believe. She was in her 70s, I believe. I think she was 75. And I understand, because I'm sure it gave her a lot of nightmares. I'm sure she probably saw them everywhere, you know, kind of thing. But you know, this is the only picture that we have of Otto, and it's a great picture. And every picture you see of him is this one, because that's the only one that we have. So I don't know if this is the only picture they ever took of him, or this is the only one that survived. I don't know. Felicitas has a couple of pictures of her. I've been able to see 3 pictures of her. I've seen 2 pictures of her like this, and 1 picture of her when she was elderly, and she was so cute. But one other thing I want to talk about with y'all, hey baby, is this family here. Now, I'm going to talk about Felicitas and Chava in retrospect very shortly, but now this is going to be a little bit more harder, because Chava and Peter, so Chava, or Eva Ginzova, and Peter, they were both born in they were both in the Terezin ghetto. They were born in Terezin stuff. They were both born in February, mind you, a week apart. He was born on the 1st, she was born on the 21st, so 2 weeks apart, really. And they both died in September. It didn't hit me until a couple, like maybe I think last year, or maybe a couple, like, was it last year? I think it was last year when it finally hit me, and I was like, wait, what? So anyway, coinky dink, I don't know. But anyways, but they were very close. Now, the one thing I forgot to mention with the Wolves is that they were pretty close as well. They were pretty close-knit family. Now, Chava's the youngest, okay? She's the baby. Peter is the oldest. There's only 2 children. Very loved by their family. They have beautiful parents, you know, taught them to be great people, that kind of thing. Well, Peter dies at Auschwitz. He's 16. Chava is 14 years old. I think she's 15 when he dies, so... But they don't find out until, I think, 2 years later. So can you imagine not knowing where your brother is for almost 2 years? Because in her diary, she writes, I think she writes one more line in 1947, Peter hasn't come back. So they're trying to find him. They don't know where the hell he is until, I believe, somebody finally said it. Hey, by the way, he's dead. Now, Chava told me this, and I'm sorry I might be a little emotional about it. When her mother found out about Peter's death, she nearly flipped the table. The kitchen table, she nearly flipped it. And she was on the floor crying with her father. And Chava's standing there about 5 feet away watching all this happen. And I can only imagine how she was feeling. I knew Chava personally. Chava was a dear friend of mine. And sometimes when you want to talk about loved ones, especially with this, it's hard in a way, because it's like, like I said, how do you explain to the average person, oh, by the way, my brother died in a gas chamber, and then he was reduced to ash. How do you explain that to the average person? Especially to Americans, who were not always ignorant about what was happening over here, especially with the politicians. They knew. They just didn't care. And yet, to me, I don't know why, it just hurts me. It hurts my heart so much. I don't know why. I think especially like when I think about Felicitas and Chava, especially because they both handled their brothers' deaths very, very differently. Let me go back to Felicitas real quick. Felicitas didn't say much, which is the typical, I guess you could say, survivor stance, because there are a lot of survivors that do not talk about their stories at all. They just don't want anything to do with it. They want nothing to do with it because it was so horrible and it was so hard, and the way that their families were taken from them was so painful. Sometimes my heart hurts for her, really. It really does. Because she would have to lay in her bed at home trying to figure out, you know, how is she going to handle life? You know, what is she going to do? Take care of her parents, obviously, and what's she going to do with all those things, you know? And gladly, they didn't really throw anything out, but they kept the picture of him, which I think is great, and she held that for a long time. And she kept all of his diaries, which is fabulous, because that is the ultimate gift that she gave us, especially to me, as a youth and diary historian and as an educator. So, now with Chava, completely different. At a time, her mother and father, they did not want to talk about Peter at all, like he didn't exist. They didn't want to do that. As she told me, she said, I know it wasn't right at the time, but Peter was taboo in our family. He became a taboo. especially his circumstances of his death. If we didn't talk about him, he didn't exist. We have, you know, luckily their mother kept all the family photos, thank God. And I have been lucky enough to see some of them. Hi, sweetie. And Chava was just a beautiful, rounded person. I mean, she's just so kind and so sweet. Even in this whole horrific thing, she lost almost all of her family, including her own brother. And yet she was the sweetest person and wanted to talk about him. When she published his diary in 2004, she told me that that was a no-brainer for her. That she told me that Peter hadn't really died. He was somewhere, and one day she would be reunited with him. Well, I want to tell you that she was, because when she died, and as I was crying my eyes out when I was told that she passed away, I could see him holding her hand and walking together home. It was very nice, but I know that they are together because they had a very special bond, as most siblings do. Well, I can't speak for everyone, but I know with Chava and Peter, they had a very special bond, and the Wolves did as well, especially the Felicitas and Otto, the younger two. So I always like to talk about these kiddos. I think just because, first of all, Chava really has my heart, and so does Peter. Peter and Otto are like my boys. I mean, I talk about them as if they were my own. And I care about them deeply. So think about that next time you want to tell a survivor to get over something, because they don't have to get over a damn thing. Have a good day.